All right, I think we're live. Hey, Matt, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Nick. Great to be
Dude,
here.
thanks so much for being on this. I'm so pumped. Uh, quick story for everyone. I just DM'd Mac on Twitter, and he's Twitter famous. So I'll put his links down below. But the biggest whale we've got here on the show so far. So Mac, again, really appreciate it. All jokes aside.
Appreciate it. I don't know how famous I am, but I'll take it. I do have a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
followers
Well,
on Twitter.
after this, you might be a little more famous.
Let's hope so.
Love it. Well, before we get into it, I have to do the obligatory. Hey, if you're watching this, please like, subscribe, comment. If you like this kind of content, let me know. This is, something I do for fun and kind of use it as my excuse to learn things and ask people questions that I wouldn't normally get to be in front of. So if you like this, all that feedback is greatly appreciated. Perfect. So Mac, let's jump into it. Can you give everyone kind of a quick intro on who you are and what you do? And then from there, I'd love to talk about your journey and obviously, the 1,200 interviews or, meetings you had and go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah. So my name's McKeever Conwell. Most people call me Mac. From Baltimore. I'm a software engineer by trade. Was government contractor supporting the DoD with a top secret clearance. In 2010, started my first company with two of my best friends.
How old were
Learned
you? 2010?
So 2010, I was around 20, 24.
Okay.
It's 24. I think. um, I ran that for 4.5 years, sold that to a Fortune 100, sold the IP to a Fortune 100 company, had another company after that didn't work out, worked at a marketing firm for a year before breaking into venture, working for the investment arm of the state of Maryland. And then in 2020, left there to start Rare Breed Ventures, a pre-seed to seed venture fund based out of Baltimore. And that is the quick and short version of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so, uh, 2010, you're 24, so you're 34, 35, 36 right now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you start the VC arm about 34. And so, Mac, as you go through that kind of process, starting off as a software engineer by trade, what was that first company you started and how did you, a lot of my folks were trying to figure out like, how do we have the gumption to go start a company and really think it's an idea worth pursuing? So what did that look for you there?
So it's interesting. So when I started my career in my sophomore year of college, I got into a student program with the DoD, which is where I get my top secret clearance. And as part of that student program, um, I, I met this core group of friends early on. And the thing about that program was they only took computer science majors, electrical engineering majors, and math majors, right? And so my core group of friends in my early 20s were all these really educated young folks who were all engineers, right?
Yeah.
And one of them happened to be this guy by the name of Patrick Jackson. And Patrick was obsessed with being the black Mark Zuckerberg. That is what he wanted to be, right? So for context, right? So I get into that program thing like 2006. The iPhone comes out, I believe, in 07. He builds his first iPhone app in 08,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he was that guy. Like as soon as the app store was open, he had an app,
Love it.
right? Like I learned PHP and MySQL because Facebook was built in PHP and MySQL, and he kept telling us how we all need to know it, right? Like that was him. And so me and my friends watched him start creating apps, start making money, and then he quits his job with the government and moves to San Francisco because some folks who used to work at Google gave him some money
Mm.
to build a company. We didn't even have the language to understand that they were investors or like what was happening. It was just our friend who was building stuff and kept telling us we needed to build stuff too. Is now going to San Francisco out to Silicon Valley to build a company. It was like, well, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And
And
then
you're in
it's also
Baltimore, right?
yes,
Okay,
so
so
I'm in
far,
Baltimore,
as far as way you could get, right?
right? And so a bunch of us of his friends decided like we could do that too because we already been telling us and so we already started thinking about it, and so we watched him do it. So I guess like 6 or 7 of us out of our core group of 30 went off to start doing businesses as well. And so then me and two of my friends decided to start a company, and it was originally this idea of crowdfunding money for gifts. So the idea of like, you go on, it's your birthday, and Facebook says, hey, it's your friend's birthday, and everybody says happy birthday. What would happen if all of your friends gave you $1 towards something you actually wanted? You might actually get something you wanted for your birthday, right? It was like the basic premise. And so we just started building a product, and we spent a year and a half building a really cool product with a bunch of features and had no customers because we had no clue what we were doing.
Are you full-time on this? Like quit your job?
No. So I would go to work, code for 8 hours, come home, take a nap, and then code for another 6 to 7 hours that night. Right? Like that was like the cycle for a year and a half. And then we realized we didn't have customers and we needed to find customers. Well, we didn't really have money. So how are we going to get money to get customers? Like, well, maybe we should get investors. What are investors? How you meet investors? And that like begins the journey down this long path of like starting me off to where I am today.
Yeah, I love that. It starts with that one friend getting in your ear.
100%.
And I think a lot of that too is also seeing what's possible. Because there are a lot of folks. I think there's a whole conversation in the tech space. Once you see what's possible, that someone can be successful at your age, now it gives you the confidence that you could do it too, and it's not something out of touch. And so just being able to see that is I found has been very important as well. Have you seen that as well?
Absolutely. Like being able to see what's possible makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm a VC today, but as a black guy from Baltimore, like who am I going to look to? It's folks like Marlon Nichols and David Hall, Charles Hudson, Richard Kirby. Like these are the folks I was meeting as an entrepreneur who are black men in venture. And it was like, we could do that?
Yeah.
And then you got folks like Elliot Robinson, who like started his career in venture in Maryland, right? And so like, being able to see them and learn help give me the confidence to be here. And, quite candidly, a bunch of those guys are mentors of mine who I've been able to call and email and be able to lean on in the process. And just like when I was an entrepreneur, I was calling my friend Patrick, like, hey, Pat, like, how do you do this?
Yeah.
And, today my friend Pat still runs a VPN. He's the CTO of a VPN company in San Francisco, right? Like he's still building, he's still doing his thing. So having those folks that you can see who have done it and who you can talk to about it makes a difference.
Yeah, I love that. And so from that, you had an exit, made some money, hopefully started a second company, and that didn't pan out. And we won't dig too deep into that, but I'd love to get a quick diagnostic. Is that the idea, the space, being the right entrepreneur for that idea? What does that boil down to?
So just for context, when I started my first company, I had a 6-figure job, 4-story townhome, 3 cars, and a fiance. Mm-hmm. When I sold that company, I had a car, right? Being an entrepreneur is hard. I then took every bit of money I made from that first company to start my second company. Actually was able to raise some money for my second company, and that one failed and I lost everything. Mm. And the reason that one failed was just poor team construction. So my CTO, so within the period of 6 weeks, I had put a new team together, raised an angel round, signed up, I think it was 120 potential customers willing to pay to be on our list, to be the first users on it pre-product, and got into an accelerator. 2.5 months into that accelerator, because like that's a really quick turnaround. Like in 6 weeks, I had all this stuff set up. Because like I had just finished the company, I learned how this all works, I knew the ins and outs. Like I was ready to go. And so, but not everybody on the team was like that. And so about 2 months into the accelerator, my CTO up and disappeared. Uh-oh. And I did not see him again for 2 years. Like he literally disappeared. No email, no phone call, no text, no nothing. Like you want to talk about getting ghosted. Like getting ghosted by a co-founder who is building your product, not a great place to be.
No. Important role.
And so we were unable to get the product back on track after that. And I was admittedly burnt out, because I did that directly after having my first startup. And so it just didn't work.
Yeah. No, it's part of the game, right? And being able to pick yourself back up and figure out what's next. No, that's great. So I think from there, and this is my LinkedIn stalking and going through all the Twitter feeds, right? Once your second company, you made the decision, you joined a marketing company, did that for about a year, and then decided, during a lot of kind of the George Floyd, shootings, and decided to break into VC. I thought, well, I skipped a part. Joined the Maryland Tech Fund,
Yes.
and that's where you kind of broke into VC. So can you talk a little bit about that on breaking into it, and what does that look like working at a government sponsored VC arm, if you will?
So it's interesting, right? So I after my second company fails, I just need to get a day job again because like just need to like stabilize my life and figure things out.
Yeah.
I'm at this marketing firm. I'm there for a year. They get a client I don't agree with ethically, so I quit. I quit on a Friday. Have no plans, just like on principle, I can't work there anymore. And the very next Monday, I got this community-wide email from the venture arm of the state of Maryland saying they were hiring a new fund manager. Now, I don't have a college degree and I don't have a finance background, but I know startups pretty well and I have a strong brand and recognition locally. Like I've been in the local tech scene for like 7, 8 years at this point. And so one of my advisors from my first startup worked at Tedco at the time. And so I called him. I see the email and I call him. I was like, hey, what do you think? You think I have a shot? What do you think? And he's like, well, Mac, we're trying to do some things differently over here, trying to look for some new blood. No reason you don't throw your hat in the ring. That was all I needed to hear. And so I wrote my first ever cover letter and applied for this venture job off of the email. And it's the only job I applied for after quitting my job because I'm an idiot, right? Like I put all my eggs in one basket, not understanding how prestigious of a job it was or how competitive it was. Like none of that. I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll get this job. 4.5 months later, they tell me that I'm not qualified for the position I applied for, but that they were creating a junior position to bring me on staff if I would take it. And so I say yes to a job making the least amount of money I'd ever made in my professional career. That was the only way I was ever going to break in the venture. And so that's how I ended up there. And being there is interesting because it's a unique place called the Maryland Technology Development Corporation. It's the largest funder of early stage tech companies in the state of Maryland, right? They do anywhere in the neighborhood of like 60 to 80 seed deals and 20 pre-seed deals every year, something like that, like crazy high volume through like 9 different or 10 different funding programs, right? So it's a lot of different programs doing a lot of different money. And they get $21 million annually from the state, off the state's balance sheet, right? So like, it's not like you need to go out and fundraise. Like every year there's new money. The only thing we had to do fundraising wise was every year we had to go in front of the legislators and tell them we were doing good work for them, right?
Yeah.
and so we were an organization where we kind of ran independently, like our own organization. But at the end of the day, our actual bosses were the legislators. So once a year, we had to go before the legislators and tell them that we were doing good works and not to take the money away, right?
Yeah, love that.
So that's interesting. And then also because it was a state-ran fund, it was a double bottom line of we were investing for returns, but we were also investing for economic impact within the state, right? And so that meant the companies we invested in had to be based in Maryland, had to be paying taxes in Maryland, had to be, employing people in Maryland. Like, it's like these extra nuances added to it. And so from a venture standpoint, what was unique was my job was to find all the best tech companies in the state of Maryland. And so the way you source companies like that is a little different. So like my introduction to sourcing and finding good companies as a VC was taking a very different type of lens, right? I couldn't just use a wide network of my friends who worked in venture to send me deals because none of them were in Maryland. Right? And so like I had to learn how to find companies in places people weren't looking. And so yeah, it was a really unique experience. But it was like the greatest job I ever got. Like that was like, people tell you like if you love your job, you'll never work a day. Like that sounded like I always thought that was a bunch of BS. nobody loves their job that much. There's no such thing. It's not true. I got that job and I found out what it was like to love a job. I made less money than I had ever made, and I worked harder than not harder than I've ever worked, but harder than I've ever worked for like a job, and loved every second of it. Loved it.
Yeah. No, I had a similar experience kind of going into my first startup, working, starting as a consultant and working up through that path of building out a services team, implementation team, learning strategy inside of that. And I mean, first 4 years, just a rocket ship, and it's a blur, but you're like, I love working. I love to think about this all day long. And I don't care how late I work on this, just because it's just like part of you at some point. Yeah. And so, you know, I always encourage everyone, if they're looking to find that fulfillment, you can find that in startups and in tech as well there. And so Mac, your story is very well known around how you, again, you're Twitter famous, man, around how you built your first fund. So you decided, hey, I want to actually go build my own kind of VC firm here. And you built that off of Twitter, off your Twitter brand. And so I'd love for you to talk maybe a minute about kind of the importance of building an audience and how that's really benefited you in your career. Because, you know, personally, you know, with this, I'm trying to build an audience, trying to grow my Twitter, all that fun stuff. And I know a lot of my friends and you know, peers are trying to do the same thing. So would love to get some feedback on how you went about doing that and how that, you know, has impacted your career.
Yeah, so the Twitter thing's interesting in the fact that, like, I never set out to build an audience. Like, that was not the goal. So when I started all of this, you know, post George Floyd, I had to get some thoughts off in my head. So I'm tweeting about that. And at the time, I had like 2,500 followers, right? Mm-hmm. So this is like June 2020. Now, here we are, literally 2 years later. Oh my gosh, 2 years later. I didn't even realize that. Jesus. Here we are 2 years later, and I'm at like 73 or 74,000 followers, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm tweeting, and as I'm tweeting, I meet a founder in Dallas, Texas, a gentleman by the name of Roberto, building a company called RoboAmp. Says with one line of code, I can make any website load in a second or less. And I come from an e-commerce background. I'm like, oh, that's incredible. If you can actually do that, right, there's tons of money to be made. But yet this was a founder having a really hard time raising capital because he was a Latin guy in Dallas, Texas. Right. Now, not to mention, like, this guy has been like coding since he was 7. It's one of the best engineers I've ever met, but no. And so I was like, okay, let me figure out a way to do a one-off investment in him. I'm talking to folks I know to see if I can like cobble some money together for him. And one of my advisors is like, Mac, you know, I don't want to invest in this company. I want to invest in every company you find. You've been talking about raising a fund for like 2 years. Go do it. And I was like, hey, you know, the world's crazy. COVID's happening. Nobody knows what's happening in the market. George Floyd just happened. Like, I don't know if this is the right time to go raise a fund. He's like, well, I got $250,000 here for you to go raise a fund. It's up to you. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm raising a fund. But I quickly realized I knew how to be an investor. I knew how to source companies, due diligence, all that. I didn't know how to raise a fund. So I had a network from the investing side. I didn't have a network of LPs.
Limited partners. Mac, for the audience, the fund is essentially committed money from, you know, investors, wealthy individuals who are saying, hey, I have $20,000, 50, whatever. Mac, I trust you to go find companies and allocate that capital, go invest in that. And if they're successful, they'll reap some, you know, reward on top of that. Is that the right way?
Exactly. So a fund is basically typically investing other people's money. And those people are called limited partners or LPs. So like wealthy people give me their money to make them more money. Like that's essentially the job of a VC, right? Like we are glorified money managers, right? The only difference is like traditional money managers help you invest in stocks and bonds and things like that. We do the same thing, but we help you invest in private companies, right? Companies that aren't on stock exchanges and such. And so I now need to go find enough people who are willing to give me their money and trust me to use their money to make investment decisions on their behalf with the hopes that I'll make them more money. And so my network got me to about 400,000. I had about $400,000 worth of people who were like, Mac, go use my money and make investments.
Yeah.
Well, that's a far cry from my goal of 10 million. And so, but I still been tweeting because like when I started the tweeting thing, I'm like after the first day or two, I said, I'm gonna just tweet every day for 2 weeks to see what happens. Like it just literally started from like just that point. And I noticed that I was tweeting a lot of educational content around venture, which like if you follow me now, like it's what I do, right? I talk a lot about how venture works, you know, giving founders ideas on things they could do, things they could do differently, how to pitch me, stuff like that. And so I noticed other VCs started following me. And I was like, well, I need to learn how to raise a fund. So if I see somebody as a VC who follows me, I'm gonna just set up to meet with them. Like I don't know why, it doesn't even matter. Like I just need to find people to learn from. And now this is probably something I've never mentioned before. So I'm
exclusive.
I'm going to bring this full circle. When I started my first company, I didn't know anything, right? So I didn't even know what networking was. And so we had been building for a year and a half, didn't have any customers, and then somebody invited us to a screening of an HBO special, not HBO, a CNN special, Blacks in Silicon Valley, which was about this accelerator Silicon Valley called the New Me Accelerator, which we actually got into 2 classes later. Crazy enough, right? That was my first event that I went to. And so we stayed there and we meet a bunch of people. And at the end of it, we had all these new connection points. And then I started going to more events. And every time I would go to an event, I would learn something new or meet somebody new. And then I found out, oh, this is what networking is. So the more I network, the better chance I'm going to have to meet an investor. That was like the initial premise, not even thinking like the more I network, the more knowledge I get and the more I might get to a customer or partner or whatever. And so I started going to events in the local tech scene in Baltimore after getting added to the local tech scene's Facebook group. So I get connected to this Facebook group and I get to learn about all these events. And so I started going to events and I made a policy in my head that if you gave me your business card, I was going to respond to, I was going to write you an email within 48 hours, either responding about a conversation we had and asking you for lunch. I didn't know who these people were, why I was meeting them, if I should meet them, any of that. I just said, for whatever reason, I made this policy in my head, I was going to meet with folks.
Yeah.
And so in my first month, which is in January 2020, January 2012, is when I first started going to these events in Baltimore. I had like a meeting every single day, at least one. And very quickly, I had one meeting every day and I would go to an event 2 to 3 times a week. And then very quickly, in a very short amount of time, I got to know who the players were in the local ecosystem, what were the right events to be at, who were the investors, who to talk to, who not to talk to, like very quickly. And like that was the beginning of me creating a network and understanding how powerful a network it was. Well, if you fast forward to 2020, and I'm thinking about starting a fund, I was like, I see these VCs following me. I need to learn how to raise a fund. I made a policy in my head randomly that if I see you as a VC, as a new follower, I would send you a DM telling you about who I was and asking if you would be willing to meet with a link to my calendar.
Yeah.
And so I just looked up and my calendar became full with meetings. And like within the first 20, I meet this incredible woman by the name of Elizabeth Yin, a partner at Hustle Fund. Love Hustle Fund, love their crew. Their fund's amazing. And in our first 30-minute meeting, she agreed to put $10,000 into my fund. And I was like, oh, other fund managers can invest in funds. Well, as long as their limited partnership agreement allows for it, then yes. Right. And I was like, well, this is the strategy. The more meetings I have, the more people I meet, some subset of those folks may commit money to my fund. And now I'm not meeting these people to raise money per se, but if they want to give me money for my fund, that's awesome. And so in the 90-day span from the middle of June to the middle of September, I had 1,128 meetings, and that helped me soft circle my first 3 million, which about only 1 million actually came into the fund though. So about $2 million worth of folks committed never end up doing the paperwork. But that definitely gave me the confidence to quit my job and start moving. And so my entire career, has been about, meeting as many people as I can and getting good at like cold outreach. So I said my second company, I signed up 120 customers pre-product. That's because I started a cold email marketing campaign that had like a 78% open rate and a 62% response rate to sign up my first customers. So for me, as somebody who came from a place where I never had a network, my entire career was always about how do I build a network from the ground up. And so that's kind of been a 3-point in my career.
Yeah, I love that. And it's all about kind of getting out there and putting yourself out there, right? You can't build a network sitting on your couch. I mean, I'm in my office right now, but so we're still DMing and but also getting in person and meeting the local kind of tech scene. And I'd love to get your view on kind of the Atlanta tech scene at the end here. But there's so much. It's not hard, right? You just have to go do it sometimes, and that's really what separates a lot of people in their career. There is doing it. Awesome, man. Well, I love the background here, Mac. I want to get into really mostly shameless questions on my part that I want to ask and learn about. And hopefully someone learns something here. I think it'd be interesting to learn about the kind of companies that you invest in. Is it traditional tech? I think you also look at some non-traditional founders as well. So I'd love to know kind of what that looks like. And then I need a VC 101. So I'm going to ask all these questions.
Awesome. So we invest in companies primarily outside of major tech hubs, outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Massachusetts. We'll still invest those areas opportunistically. And we're industry agnostic. The only thing we won't do is we won't do bio companies because I don't have a PhD. I'm not smart enough for that. But I will literally invest in just about anything else. Right? My bias is towards founders that have a unique or repeatable perspective to customer acquisition and physical products and markets that have lacked innovation for a long time. But within that, we've invested in everything from B2B SaaS to ag tech to fintech to beauty to we have a company in our portfolio called Rebundle. They make plant-based biodegradable braiding hair. That's right, synthetic hair made out of plants. We also have a company out of Memphis, Tennessee called Blank Beauty that has a device that can make nail polish in any color from a picture. Take a picture of something, get nail polish to match the color of the picture. Right. And then on the flip side, we got Buffalo Market. They do food distribution.
Okay.
Right? And then you got RoboAmp that makes websites load faster. Traditional B2B SaaS company, right? We'd be all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so getting into my, baseline questions. So if I'm talking to a VC, you're kind of angel investing. Is that kind of the tier that we're looking at, seed investing?
So we do pre-seed and seed, right? And so if you think about angel investing or angel investors, so angel investors and VCs are two different things.
Okay.
Angel investors are people who are investing their own personal money, right? And so angel investors are just individuals who, it's their money, they're making investments. And so they make investments for whatever reason they want. A VC is a professional investor who, is investing other people's money, generally speaking, right? And so the way we invest and think about companies can be very different because as an angel investor, it's just a person. So every person's different. So they invest for whatever reason. When you think about pre-seed is typically just saying the earliest stages of investing. Angel investors and pre-seed investors tend to invest in around the same stage, right? Some typically your very first money is going to be from angels or just individuals. Some pre-seed investors invest that early. So that's one way you can think about it. So yes.
Yep. Love that. And then at that pre-seed round, what's typical amounts? You might invest in a company, how do you do valuations? Just what's the playbook there?
Pre-seed rounds could be anything from $100K to, I've seen people do $2 billion at pre-seed, which is not the norm, but happens. And so it's really just a way of saying your very first early round of funding, you haven't figured out a whole bunch of stuff. You probably have a product. You probably have some customers or some users. There's something pointing to like something's happening. We don't know what's happening, but something's happening, right? And so there's the early money. When it comes to valuations at the early stages of a venture, so like pre-seed, seed, even Series A to an extent, it's a lot more art than it is science. Like the valuation almost has nothing to do with like the actual business, right? Like somebody who has an app, how is their company valued at 5 million? It's probably like there's no business case for that.
Right.
But the way you kind of come up with your valuation, and this is like the starting point, this is how valuation works early. How much money does the founder want to raise? How much ownership do the investors want to have? And then it goes up and down based on who has what leverage. And so an example, founder wants to raise $1 million. VCs want to own 20%. Okay, then your valuation is now, generally speaking, 5 million. Because 1 million to 5 is 20%, right? That's kind of the starting point. And then we start talking about leverage. So if you're in a place where you got a bunch of VCs or investors who are interested, your traction is growing faster than most would at your stage, you might go to that VC and be like, hey, I know you said 5 million, but honestly, I'd rather have a valuation closer to 10. You know, I got enough interest, I got enough people went in, so like I think 10 is where I want to be. And then that investor can decide yay or nay on that. On the flip side, that investor's like, you know what? We said 5, but we're the only investor you're talking to. We're the only people interested in putting in money. We truly believe in this, but we don't think 5 million is right. We think 4 million is right. And then you as the entrepreneur decide, okay, should I take that or should I try to wait till somebody else comes along? I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where the negotiations on valuation come in. But at that stage, it's a whole lot more art than it is science because there's not much there for the company.
Yeah. And so 2 questions that spun out of that is, as a founder, how do you know what's the back of the napkin math on like $1 million? Is that going into how many folks I need to hire, how much I need to spend on marketing? And then I had one other question, but I'll think of it. So start with that one.
So really, if you decide you want to take money from professional investors, from VCs, then you are signing up to be on the treadmill of raising money every 18 to 24 months, right? You are making a conscious decision that this is what I'm going to do. And so when you raise capital, you're raising capital in this current round to be able to move your company as far as you need to be to raise more capital for the next round. So the money you're raising now is so that you can hit the metrics you want to hit to get you to the point where you can raise more money in the future, right? And so when you think about like that million is supposed to get you to a runway of, let's call it 12 to 24 months of operations, and should get you to a specific outcome and growth that you think will be big enough for you to raise more capital. So it's like, hey, I'm raising $1 million to give us 18 months of runway or 18 months of operations so that in the next 12 months, we can sign up our first 50,000 users, which will generate our first, call it 450,000 in revenue. Okay. If you could do that with $1 million, that might get you to a point where you can raise more money. Right, and I'm just making these numbers up. Like, don't quote me. Don't say those are real numbers. This is me just making things up, right? But it's like, okay, maybe if you do that, that'll put you in a position where then you can then go out and raise $2 or $3 million to then grow some more, right?
Yeah, so very much looking 3 steps ahead on where do we think this is going to go, having the plan behind it, and then it's all execution to grow into that.
And like most of that money is going to go towards team, going to go towards talent, right? Hiring people to execute.
Right. Yeah. And then one thing I always struggle with, Mac, is, how big is the idea, right? There's only so many billion-dollar companies out there. And, how big is an idea worth pursuing? How big is an idea worth you investing in? And where do you see that play out?
As an investor, my starting point is I have to believe the company has the potential to have $1 billion valuation. right?
Mhm.
Because in venture capital is based on what's known as the power law. What the power law says is your venture firm is only as good as your best investment, right? It's not about all the investments you make. It's about the one best investment you make is probably going to determine the outcome of how good of a venture fund you have,
Mhm.
right? So if you're not able to have one company that's better than everybody else, well, you're probably going to have a very mediocre or failed venture fund, right? So the starting point is every company I invest in has to have the potential to get to $1 billion valuation, so that it has the potential to be a true outlier in the fund.
Right. No, that makes sense. Um, and I'm just going rapid fire here.
Mhm.
So for you, is it the idea? Is it the founder? Is it, the potential? What makes you want to invest in those early stage companies?
Very often it's the founder, but it's really some mix of those things. Like
Mhm.
it started first part, the first part's it's got to be in the market I believe is big enough to support $1 billion company.
Right.
And then it's going to be, founders and their unique perspective on the world or on the way they get customers. Like again, my bias is towards customer acquisition. And so founders who are thinking very critically about how they get customers or how to go about getting customers differently are always going to be the type of founders to get me excited.
Yeah. Next one here. So founders, they're quitting their job, they're starting a company. Mac, how do they pay themselves? Like, is everyone, living off savings? Are they taking money from VCs to give themselves salary? What does that look like?
You got to figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I lived off of ramen noodles, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and spaghetti with butter for
Yeah.
years of my life. Some founders, do some like side gigs or do some consulting on the side, but really, if you're out there building, you've already quit your job, you're going full bore on trying to build the company up so that you can start generating revenue sooner than later, so you start paying yourself, right?
Right.
VCs aren't excited to give you a check for you to pay yourself.
Mm,
VCs aren't excited to give you a check so you can quit your job, right? Like
right.
all that money at the early stages got to go to like building out the product more and building up that customer base, right? So what do you do to survive? You figure it out. It's not easy. Like it's not a great answer, but like I've been there. It sucks. Sucks a lot. I would tell you don't quit your job sooner than you have to, right? Like wait till that product is moving, wait till you got some customers going. Like don't just go in and start playing this game about how fast can I get to zero? Because like what you learn is you'll get to zero and you'll still feel comfortable enough to keep going. Right?
Mm,
Like just you figure it out, but don't do it too early. Like I did it way
yeah.
too early and like lost a lot.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's just stuff like people don't talk about. And so like you're seeing people, raise money and you're like, don't you have a family? What does this look like? And so there's a lot behind the scenes there. So that's helpful. And Mac, what are some ideas that you see over and over again that, aren't working for whatever reason? And, you just kind of stay away from those.
I mean, there's a lot of things that are oversaturated and in markets that are already established, right? Like social media, right now, NFTs,
Mm.
CRMs, productivity tools, all kinds of stuff. And what I'd say is I'm not good at picking those because I see a bunch of them. And what I know is that there's always going to be a new winner. Like there's going
Yeah.
to be a new social media app that outperforms TikTok. It's going to be like I think about this like every 7 years when it comes to consumer products, right? There's going to be a new big thing every 7 years because every 7 year cycle is a cycle of middle schoolers. So from
Yep.
somebody going to middle school to graduating high school, their generation or their group is going to come up with another big thing that they're going to love. That's going to be different than the last group, right? Like TikTok's going to become old to them, and so they're going to be looking for the next thing, right? So I fundamentally know there's going to be a new one. Which company's going to be the new one that makes it's like hard to tell. And so I typically stay away from stuff like that, like dating apps. Like I know there's going to be a new big dating app. Tinder and Bumble are getting old.
Yeah.
I'm just getting old. Like when you think about it, they've been around almost a decade, right? Kids today don't want to play with something that's a decade old,
Yep.
right? So I know that like Gen Zers are going to have their own version of these things. How do you pick them? it's really hard because there's so many. And so I typically stay away from that stuff. And the instances where I do make investments in those spaces is because I see a company in that space that's just growing so fast that's piqued my interest of like, okay, it's growing so fast, there might be something here.
Yeah, no, I love that. Let's wrap up. One more question, and then we'll tell everyone where they can find you. So you're based out of Maryland, but you're investing all over the country. I'm based out of Atlanta. A lot of friends in Atlanta. We're all hoping for a big IPO in the next few years, and we'll have some money and we'll start our own companies. What's your view on like the Atlanta tech scene? Have you done much down here? Would love your thoughts and perspective on what you're seeing in the South.
Very bullish on the Atlanta tech scene. It's really thriving scene. Atlanta is probably one of these like tier 2 cities, right? If you think of Silicon Valley and New York is tier 1, Atlanta is definitely in the tier 2. There's been a lot of interest, a lot of money being poured into it. It was actually, for me, probably the next biggest up and coming scene until Miami became like the Web3 hub of the world, right? But like outside of Miami, Atlanta is probably the next biggest scene that's coming up. A lot of things happening there, a lot of unique things happening there, a lot of new funds happening there. So I'm really, really bullish on what's going on in Atlanta. So yeah, I think if you were starting a company today and you didn't want to live in New York or San Francisco, I would tell you if you were looking for another place to go that had capital and was putting capital towards their entrepreneurs, you have Washington State, you got Georgia, you got Florida, and very specifically, you got Seattle, Miami, and Atlanta.
Yeah, love that. All right, one more question here. I lied. What are your thoughts on Maryland crab cakes? Is that, big fan? Could go without.
If you come to Maryland, it's something you have to do.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm a big fan. Like, yes, crab cakes are everything.
Love it, man. Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun, Mac. I tried to stay on time, stay on budget here. Where can people find you? I'm going to put all the socials, and if people want to learn more, where can they go?
Find me on Twitter at Mac Conwell, MacConwell.
Love it. Awesome. Well, for everyone who stayed this long into the interview, really appreciate it. Give Mac a hand here for responding to a cold DM outreach. I think it's the power of building community, building that network, and Mac, don't hold any of my questions against me in a year when I reach out for some funding.
No problem.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Perfect.